Red Hollow, Tennessee was the kind of town that went quiet in layers. First, the shops on Main Street closed, and the last car rolled past the square. Then the diner lights clicked off, leaving only the buzzing motel sign at the edge of town. By midnight, even that seemed to glow softer, as if the town itself were lowering its voice. Marshal Elias Mercer sat alone in his office, watching the cursor blink on a half-finished report. The computer's pale light turned the framed certificates on the wall into ghostly rectangles. He'd read the same sentence 3 times and still couldn't remember what it said. He knew these nights too well. The ones that blurred together, the same arguments, the same noise complaints, the same faces getting older, while the town stayed the same shape. Sometimes he caught himself thinking he'd been sitting at this desk forever, just changing out the calendars. He leaned back, chair creaking, and listened. The building had its own small vocabulary of sounds. The hum of the vending machine in the hall, the rattle of an ancient air vent, the slow tick of the clock above the door. Outside, the world sounded like nothing at all. No traffic, no voices, just the steady, smothered quiet of a town asleep. This was the part of the shift when his mind liked to wander. He found himself thinking about the roads just beyond the edge of town. The ones that cut into dark trees and tall grass, their yellow lines swallowed by shadow. He knew them all. The sharp curve by Hollow Creek, the lane that turned to gravel near the old quarry, the narrow back road that always washed out in spring. He liked the way that knowledge sat in him, solid and familiar, a private map built up over years. Tonight, though, there was something else in the back of his mind. A gap. A vague sense of missing a turn that he couldn't name. It was like staring at a word until it stopped looking like language. He rubbed his eyes and glanced at the wall clock. Almost 12:30. Too late to pour another cup of coffee that would just sit and go stale. Too early to justify closing up and calling it a night. The station's main radio sat on the counter, little green numbers glowing steadily. Quiet. The line from County Dispatch was clear and uneventful. No calls, no chatter. Just the low, reassuring presence of something ready if needed. Underneath it, on a lower shelf, the old unit gathered dust. The analog box was older than Elias's career, a squat black thing with worn edges and a faded label that still read County Emerge. Years back, the techs had pulled the wiring, switching everything over to digital. The old unit was supposed to be dead, kept as a kind of relic no one had bothered to throw away. Elias wasn't sure when he'd last really looked at it. It was just part of the room, like the filing cabinet or the dent in the floor where someone dropped a toolbox 10 years ago. Always there, never noticed. He might not have noticed it tonight either, if it hadn't exhaled. The sound was so soft at first he thought it was his imagination. A tiny rush of static barely louder than his own breathing. He looked up, waiting for the digital radio to light up. It didn't. The noise came again. A faint, gritty whisper from below the counter. Elias frowned and pushed his chair back. The old instincts stirred. Equipment malfunction, stray interference, some simple explanation. He told himself that as he walked around the desk, as if saying it first would make it true. The analog unit sat where it always sat, mute and unimportant. Except its tiny red power light was on. He stared at it. The techs had cut that line, he thought. He remembered signing the work order. He remembered the guy in the county polo shirt saying, "This thing's not going to do anything but look ugly now." The memory was clear, solid, real. Yet there the light was, steady, as if it had never gone out. "Great," he muttered. "Now we've got haunted radios." His attempt at humor didn't land, even in his own head. He reached down and tapped the casing with 2 fingers. "You're not supposed to be alive, friend." The radio answered with a crackle, louder this time, rising out of the static like someone turning up a volume dial. Beneath it, threaded through the noise, was something that might have been a voice. Elias froze. "Not real. Real. Not real." The words slid through his mind, unbidden, in a slow, looping rhythm. The feeling that came with them was stranger than fear. a kind of vertigo in his thoughts, as if something familiar were standing just out of sight. He shook it off and flipped the nearest switch, more to feel in control than anything else. Red Hollow Marshal's office, he said. This is Marshal Mercer. If someone's on this channel, go ahead. The static thinned, concentrated. For a heartbeat, he heard nothing but his own breathing. Then the voice came through. Please, a woman said. Please don't hang up. It didn't sound like a prank. No false brightness, no slurred silliness. Her words were clear, though her voice carried the frayed edge of someone who'd been crying too long or trying not to for too long. Elias straightened, the loose heaviness of the late hour burning away in an instant. I'm here, he said. You've reached the Marshal. What's your emergency? A ragged inhale on the other end. He imagined her somewhere alone. Phone clutched tight, listening for sounds in the dark. He's back, she whispered. He's in the house again. Practical thoughts kicked in. Possible break-in. Domestic dispute. Someone creeping around where they shouldn't. He felt for his notepad, found it under a stack of forms, and flipped to a blank page. Okay, he said, falling into the measured cadence he'd used 1,000 times. I'm going to help you. I just need you to stay calm and answer a few questions. What's your name, ma'am? There was a pause. Long enough that he almost repeated himself. Then, you don't remember me? The question caught him off guard. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the way she said them. There was no accusation in it. No heat. Just a tired, hollow surprise, as if she'd expected disappointment and gotten it right on schedule. I talk to a lot of people in this job, Elias said, keeping his voice gentle but firm. If you tell me your name, I might. You're the Marshal, she said, cutting him off. Like that settled it. You've always been the Marshal. You said you wouldn't forget. You promised you wouldn't let him out again. A chill slid down his back. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase came again, uncoiling from somewhere he didn't want to look too closely at. He forced himself to stay on track. Ma'am, is there someone physically in your home right now? Do you see anyone? I don't see him, she said. He doesn't come like that. He walks through the walls, through the floor. I feel him when he moves. He's getting bolder. The road woke up again. That's why. You know that. You always know before I do. He stared at the dusty radio, feeling the office shrink around him. The computer screen, the clock, the neat stacks of paper, all of it seemed suddenly flimsy. What road? He asked, because the part of him that handled reports and calls needed something solid. An address, a landmark, anything. Old Briar Road, she said. Same as always. End of the lane. Number 12. You'll see the sign, if you remember right. She gave a brittle little laugh that didn't sound much like a laugh at all. You always do, eventually. Elias frowned. He knew every road in the county by name, by number, sometimes by the families that lived along them. Old Briar Road sparked nothing familiar. It felt less like a missing file and more like erasure, as if something had been scraped clean out of his mind. I don't have a road by that name on my maps, he said slowly. Are you sure you're in Red Hollow's jurisdiction? Silence pressed through the line. Where else would I be? She asked. You're the one who took it off the maps, Marshal. That's how you keep him away, remember? You forget the road, and he becomes just a story again. Not real. Real. Not real. That's what you used to say. The words landed with a weight that felt personal, intimate. Like something he'd said on a porch or in a kitchen, late at night, to someone who was trying not to be afraid. He couldn't remember ever meeting her. He couldn't imagine forgetting if he had. What's your name? He tried again, but his voice was softer now. Please. On the other end of the line, he could hear her draw a breath, as if preparing to say something that hurt. Before she could speak, something else crept into her tone, a tremor, a shudder that seemed to pass through her voice. He's closer, she murmured. The walls are thin tonight. The road's opening up. I can hear him in the floor. You took him away last time. You said you'd do it again. You promised. Elias looked toward the wall where the county map hung, its pale lines and colored blocks neatly framed. He thought of empty stretches of road, of turns that felt wrong even when they were right, of that nagging sense, all evening, that he was forgetting something simple and important. Stay where you are, he said. The decision settled into place as he spoke it. Stay in the house. Don't open any doors. I'm going to find you. She was quiet for a heartbeat. 2. When you come, she said. You won't be alone. You never are. That's why you try so hard not to remember. The line thinned, the voice retreating like someone walking down a hallway and closing doors behind them. He leaned closer to the radio. Ma'am, I need you to keep talking to me. Can you tell me your... The rest of the call unraveled into static, then slipped into a flat, unbroken hush. Not the clean click of a disconnect. Not the tone of a dropped line. Just absence, pure and simple. Elias stood there, with his hand braced on the counter, listening to nothing at all. For a long moment, he didn't move. The office seemed to hold its breath with him, the air thick, the clock suddenly too loud. He was aware of every small detail, the smudge on the corner of the map frame, the uneven hum of the old refrigerator down the hall, the feel of his own heartbeat in his throat. Then the years of habit and training and duty pushed through the fog. He took his keys from the hook by the door, clipped his radio back to his belt, checked the weight of the sidearm at his hip as if to reassure himself that something, at least, was still solid and real. He didn't log the call, didn't call county to ask if they'd played with any old equipment. Some questions, he realized, he did not want answers to not yet. He stepped out into the red hollow night, pulled the office door shut behind him, and walked toward his cruiser, carrying with him a road name he'd never seen written down and the uncomfortable suspicion that somewhere, in a part of his memory he'd chosen not to look at for a long time, Old Briar Road had been waiting. Old Briar Road revealed itself as quietly as the call had come. Elias turned onto the narrow lane with the uneasy sense of someone stepping over a threshold without quite meaning to. The cruiser's headlights washed over cracked pavement bordered by grass grown too high, as though the county hadn't sent a maintenance crew this way in years. Maybe ever. He eased forward, driving slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the way the shadows leaned in over the road. The branches arched overhead, interlocking so tightly that the night seemed to close in behind him. Within a minute the main highway was gone, erased by darkness and the soft, steady press of trees. Red Hollow might have been 100 miles behind him instead of 1. He tried to picture the map hanging in his office. Every street, every farm road, every dead-end spur. He knew them all. He'd driven them for years, marking the changes as new houses went up or old ones were left to rot in the weather. But this road, this one, had no place in his memory. No landmark to anchor it, no familiar bend or rise in the land. It felt like driving into a part of himself he'd forgotten. The cruiser rolled cautiously over a shallow dip in the pavement. The road curved left, then right. No mailboxes, no driveways, no sign that anyone had ever lived out here. Only the dense woods, tall and patient, watching him pass. He lifted the radio from his belt. The digital unit crackled obligingly as he keyed in. Dispatch. This is Marshal Mercer. Do you copy? After a pause, a sleepy voice answered. I'm out past the east limits, he said, keeping his tone steady. Just checking something out. You get any interference on the old analog system tonight? A rustle of papers, a tired sigh. Marshal, that thing isn't even plugged in. We pulled the lines years ago. You know that. Yeah, he murmured, just making sure. You need backup? He hesitated. The question lingered in the air, heavier than it should have been. Backup for what? A house that might not exist on a road no map acknowledged? A woman who claimed he'd been there before, who said he forgot things on purpose? No, he said finally. Just routine. Copy. Check in every 15. He clicked off and rested the radio on the seat beside him. The road ahead narrowed even further, the tree line pressing close enough that branches grazed the sides of the cruiser. Elias slowed to a crawl. "Number 12, she'd said. "End of the lane." His headlights washed over a break in the trees. A small clearing. A house. He almost didn't recognize it as a house at first. It sat hunched on its foundation, boards weathered and peeling, roof sagging toward the center. One of the porch rails leaned inward at an angle too sharp to be accidental. The windows were dark, opaque, as if filled with something heavier than shadow. Yet the structure wasn't abandoned, or hadn't always been. The path leading up to the steps was worn into the grass. A faint outline of a garden bed sat to the left, overtaken by weeds, and on the front door, a porch light glowed dimly. Not bright enough to illuminate the yard, but strong enough to say, "Someone lives here. Someone expects company." Elias parked the cruiser on the edge of the clearing and turned off the engine. Silence wrapped around the vehicle like a heavy blanket. He sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the porch light. He should have called for backup, but something in him, deep and stubborn, whispered that this wasn't meant for anyone else. That bringing another deputy down this road would be a mistake. The thought didn't feel like fear. It felt like memory, an old lesson pushed down so far he couldn't grasp where it came from. He stepped out of the cruiser, boots meeting the cool ground with a soft thud. The air felt different here, thicker, edged with a faint, metallic taste he couldn't place. He walked slowly toward the house, eyes sweeping the yard, the windows, the tree line. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. The whole clearing seemed caught in a held breath. When he reached the porch, he paused. The boards sagged under the weight of his first step, groaning as if waking from sleep. He tested them carefully before crossing to the door. The porch light flickered as he approached, dimming once, twice, then brightening again. He knocked. Red Hollow Marshal's office. "Ma'am, are you inside?" His voice felt too loud, swallowed by the house rather than echoed back. No answer. He knocked again, firmer. "Ma'am, I'm here to help. Are you all right?" Still nothing. He tried the doorknob. It turned easily. He froze. A memory tugged at him, not a real one, but the shape of one. A sensation of doing this before, of feeling the same cold metal in his palm, of hearing the same soft click as the latch released. A déjà vu so sharp it bordered on pain. Not real. Real. Not real. He pushed the door open. Inside, the darkness seemed deeper than it should have been. His eyes strained to make sense of shapes. A table, a chair, a coat rack in the corner. The air smelled of old wood and something faintly sweet, like decayed flowers. He stepped in, letting the door ease shut behind him. The floorboards creaked softly under his weight. "Ma'am," he called. "It's Marshal Mercer. I'm coming in." Silence answered him, or nearly silence. Somewhere deeper in the house, he thought he heard the faint shift of weight. A footstep. Barely there, but unmistakable. He moved toward the sound. "Ma'am, if you can hear me, please say something." The faint footstep answered again. Or maybe it wasn't a footstep. Maybe it was something brushing against a wall. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe it was... No, it was movement. He knew the difference. As he crossed the living room, his eyes adjusted enough to pick out more details. A mug on the table, half full. A lit candle in a shallow dish, its wick burned down to a stub. A rocking chair that swayed gently as if someone had just abandoned it. The air held warmth. Someone had been here recently. Maybe minutes ago. "Ma'am," Elias tried again, voice steady but low. "I'm here now. I need you to answer me." The answer came from the hallway at the back of the house. Not a voice, not a human sound, just a slow, deliberate shift of weight like something stepping aside. Elias's fingers hovered near the holster at his hip. He wasn't alone in the house. And whatever else was true, one thing settled over him, with a clarity that frightened him more than the dark. He had indeed been here before, even if he could not remember when. The hallway stretched ahead of Elias like a dark, narrow throat. Even from where he stood at its mouth, he could tell something was off. It wasn't just the lack of light. The proportions felt wrong, too long, too narrow, as though the house had been built by someone who had never actually lived inside a house. or by someone who had forgotten how walls were supposed to behave. He drew a slow breath and stepped forward. The floorboards shifted under him, a subtle rise and fall, like something breathing. He told himself it was just old construction, a settling foundation. Loose nails, but the explanation rang hollow. Everything in this place felt hollow, as if it were wearing the idea of a house, but not the substance of one. Halfway down the hall, he paused. A faint line in the dust on the floor caught his eye. A footprint, bare, small, recent. The woman. He crouched to get a better look. The print was clean, defined, unmuddled by age, but the dust around it seemed heavier, as though the rest of the floor had gathered years of neglect in a way that didn't match the candles still burning in the front room or the lingering warmth in the air. It was as if the house had aged unevenly, as if parts of it remembered a longer life than others. He rose and continued down the hall. A doorway stood slightly ajar on the left. As he passed, a thin draft slipped out, brushing his arm. The room beyond was faintly visible. A small bedroom with peeling wallpaper patterned in faded green vines. The bed was neatly made, the blanket tucked tight as if done by someone with careful hands and old habits. A pair of slippers sat at the foot of the bed, but the air was cold enough to bite. He backed out and kept moving. At the end of the hall, he reached a second door closed this time, its surface warped in a way that made the wood bulge inward. He pressed his palm against it. The wood felt damp, almost pliable. He whispered a soft warning to the occupant he hoped was inside, then pushed it open. The room beyond was a kitchen, or had once been. The counters sagged on their anchors, and one of the cabinet doors hung crooked, as if pulled too far too often. A pot sat on the stove, lid askew. Inside it, a cloudy liquid had dried at the edges, forming a ring of residue like it had been boiling hours or years ago. A chair, near the small table, rocked gently, back and forth, back and forth. It was the same movement he'd seen in the living room, only more pronounced, as though someone had risen from it moments before he entered. "Ma'am," he called softly. The chair stilled. He felt the house, listening. As he stepped fully into the kitchen, a faint movement in the corner of his vision made him turn. The far wall, its wallpaper faded to the color of old parchment, shifted. Not much, just enough for him to see the surface bow inward, like pressure from the other side was testing it. He blinked and stared, waiting for the trick of light to resolve into something ordinary. But the wall pulsed again. He took one step back. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "if you're in danger, I need you to answer me." The pulse stopped. For a heartbeat, the house held perfectly still, and then a shape pressed outward from within the wall. It wasn't a full form. No face, no features. Just a vague impression, a shoulder, an elbow, a curve that might have been a head pushing the wallpaper outward as if the plaster behind it had turned to water. The wall bulged, stretched, then eased back, the shape dissolving into the surface. Elias stepped back again, heart thudding, hand hovering near his sidearm. He didn't draw it. He wasn't sure what good a weapon would do against a wall that behaved like skin. The image of the footprint resurfaced in his mind. Someone else had been here. Someone human. Someone terrified. He forced himself to steady his breathing and scanned the room for any sign of her. A note, a message, anything. That was when he saw the photograph frame on the counter near the refrigerator. He reached for it. The glass was cracked, a spiderweb fracture spreading from one corner. He lifted the frame carefully and wiped some dust from the surface. The picture showed the front porch of this house, newer, cleaner, freshly painted. A younger woman stood on the steps, smiling. Beside her, arm draped casually over the railing, stood a man. Elias froze. The man looked like him, not perfectly. Not enough that someone else would notice. But the height, the build, the angle of the jaw, even the tilt of the shoulders, it all echoed him. Except, the face was blurred. Not like the photograph was damaged, but like someone had rubbed the image away with their thumb until only the suggestion of a man remained. He stared at it far too long. Had he been here? Truly? Had he stood on that porch with this woman? No memory surfaced, nothing solid. Only the creeping sensation that the answer wasn't hidden from him by time but by intention, his own, or something else's. A soft sound behind him made him turn sharply. The rocking chair began to sway again. Not gently this time. More urgently, as if someone had pushed off from it in haste. He stepped back into the hall, listening. Something was moving deeper in the house. Not in a room, not on the floor, but around him, threaded through the walls, brushing against the interior of the structure like a hand sliding beneath fabric. "Ma'am," he said, voice low. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need you to tell me where you are." A faint voice drifted from the far end of the hall. "Here." He turned toward it. The voice came again, closer this time. "Here." He followed it, moving cautiously, every sense sharpened. The hallway felt longer than before, stretching subtly, as if the house were making space ahead of him. He reached the door at the far end, a door he didn't remember seeing when he entered. It was too new, compared to the rest of the house. Its wood smooth, its brass handle polished. He put his hand on it. "Ma'am?" the voice whispered on the other side. "He's here." Elias steadied himself and pushed the door open. The room beyond was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no windows, no dust on the floor, no marks on the walls. Perfectly bare, as if the space had been hollowed out. But in the center of the floor, written in a thin line of dark soot, were 4 words. "You always forget him." Elias stared at the message, the silence expanding around him. Then something moved behind him, just out of sight. He turned, and the door slammed shut. The impact of the door echoed through the empty room, a hollow finality that silenced every thought in Elias's mind. He spun toward it, grasping the handle. It refused to turn. He braced his shoulder against the wood and pushed hard. Nothing. The room did not so much resist him as ignore him, the structure behaving as though the door had never been designed to open from this side at all. For a moment, he simply stood there, breathing steadily, letting his pulse settle from its initial jolt. Panic was a short road. It went nowhere useful. He knew that, from long experience, so he forced himself to catalog the details around him: the emptiness, the lack of dust, the message written in soot. A blank room in a house that wasn't blank. A door that had been open moments ago and now wasn't. A woman's voice he'd followed into what felt suspiciously like a trap. "You always forget him." He studied the words carefully. They didn't smudge when he touched them. The soot was etched into the wood, not resting atop it, as though something had traced the letters with heat rather than pigment. He let his fingers hover above the final word, "forget." The call echoed in his thoughts, the strange familiarity in the woman's voice, her insistence that he had been here before. The blurred face in the photograph, the nagging, hollow space in his memory where something should have been. Not real. Real. Not real. He refused to let the phrase take hold again. He backed away from the message and scanned the floor, the walls, the corners. Still nothing. No markings, no furniture, no cracks or seams that suggested another door. Just a blank cube of a room that might as well have been carved from a single block of wood. Except, no, not completely blank. Elias frowned. A faint line traced along the baseboards, so thin it was nearly invisible. He crouched and inspected it. The line wasn't a seam, it was dust. No, not dust, something finer. A pale residue that clung to the wood like chalk. It circled the entire room. A boundary. He touched it lightly. The moment his fingertip brushed the powder, a subtle pressure pushed against him like static before a storm, prickling the hair on his arms. He jerked his hand back, the sensation vanished immediately. A memory surfaced, unbidden and blurry. Standing in a room like this one, tracing a similar line, saying something he couldn't quite hear through the fog of recollection. Warning someone. No being warned. He forced himself upright. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "Think." Pacing helped. He crossed the room slowly, back and forth, letting the act center him. He'd been locked in tight spaces before: panic rooms, barricaded bedrooms, Even once inside a shipping container a kidnapper had used as a hideout. There was always a way out. You just had to understand the logic of the space. But this room didn't have logic. His footsteps made no sound. The air held no smell. His presence seemed to have no weight here. And the more he walked, the more he realized the dimensions felt subtly inconsistent. The far wall seemed farther away each time he crossed toward it. Not dramatically, just enough that a part of his mind tripped over the inconsistency. He turned toward the message again. You always forget him. He tried to recall the cases he'd worked over the years. Missing persons, domestic calls, land disputes, accidents. Red Hollow had its share of trouble, but never anything that matched the kind of dread simmering inside this house. Unless he'd buried the memory. His eyes returned to the line of soot on the floor. A boundary. A circle. A seal. A thought struck him. If the room wasn't meant to contain people, maybe it was meant to contain something else. He stepped over the boundary. Nothing happened. But he felt something shift. Almost imperceptibly. Like the air exhaled around him, a tension easing, a stagnation loosening. He walked the perimeter of the room slowly, letting his hand drift across the walls. Smooth, 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 and then rough. He stopped. A single square of wall felt grainier than the rest, like it had been sanded unevenly or patched over. He pressed gently. The wall resisted. He pressed harder. The surface flexed not like wood, but like damp canvas stretched over a frame. He leaned in and pushed with his full weight. The wall bowed inward, and then, too fast to brace himself, gave way entirely. He fell forward into darkness. His shoulder hit a wooden floor. Pain flared down his arm, but he rolled quickly, expecting further collapse. Instead, he found himself sprawled in another hallway, this one narrower, older, lined with wallpaper that peeled in long, curling strips. Behind him, the wall he'd burst through was solid again, flat, seamless, as if it had never yielded at all. He pulled himself to his feet and steadied his breath. The house had rearranged itself, or it had shown him a path he was meant to find. Either possibility was unsettling. He lifted the radio on his belt and keyed it. Dispatch, this is Marshal Mercer. Do you copy? Silence. He tried again. Nothing. He glanced at the digital display. The numbers flickered faintly, then went blank. He tapped the casing. The screen lit, then died again. The house was interfering. He put the radio away and started down the hallway. This section of the house felt different, less abandoned, more paused. As though a family had lived here once and simply stepped out for a moment, expecting to return. A child's drawing hung crookedly on the wall, a stick figure family holding hands beneath a lopsided sun. One of the figure's heads had been scribbled out, not violently, but repeatedly, as if corrected again and again until no detail remained. He continued forward. A door stood ajar at the end of the hall. A faint light glowed inside, not warm like a lamp, but pale, almost bluish. He reached the doorway and looked in. It was a small study. A desk sat beneath a window with warped glass. Papers lay scattered across the surface, some yellowed, some crisp. A typewriter sat in the center, keys worn with use. On top of the stack of papers lay a journal. The cover was cracked, the edges frayed. But one thing was unmistakable. The handwriting on the first page. His. He picked it up slowly, a cold heaviness building in his chest. The first entry was written in a hurried scrawl. If you're reading this, you forgot again. Stop reading. Leave the house. Erase the road. It's the only way to weaken him. He turned the page. He follows memory, not footsteps. If you remember him, he becomes real. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase hammered through him again like a returning nightmare. He flipped to the final entry. If the woman calls, don't trust the voice. It may not be hers. Or it may be her from another time. The house is layered, so is she. A chill slipped down Elias's spine. The typewriter next to the journal clicked once. He froze, staring at it. Another key depressed slowly, imprinting a letter on the blank page waiting in the carriage. Then another. He stepped back as the machine typed a single, short sentence. "He's in the wall behind you." Elias turned. Elias turned sharply, expecting, hoping, maybe for a person, a shadow, even an animal. Anything that made sense. The wall behind him remained still, perfectly still. His breath tightened in his chest as he stepped closer, studying the wood grain. It looked no different from any other wall in the house, aged pine, coated in peeling cream paint, but the typewriter's message clung to his mind like a hand gripping the back of his neck. He pressed his palm flat against the surface. It was warm, not room temperature warmth, living warmth. The faint heat of a body on the other side, inches away. Elias pulled his hand back as though burned. The warmth vanished instantly, leaving the wood cold again. He waited, staring, muscles locked in anticipation. But nothing bulged through this time. No shifting silhouette, no unnatural bend of the boards. The house didn't need to repeat its warnings. Something was in the walls. Or worse, something was the walls. He forced himself to step away, returning to the desk where the typewriter sat silent once more. His journal lay open, accusingly familiar. He ran a thumb along the page edges, searching for any memory, any hint that he had written these warnings, made these choices. Nothing. Memory felt like trying to hold mist, but the handwriting was unmistakable. The small slant, the way he looped his Y's, there was no denying it. This was him, from years ago, or days, or minutes. Time felt sticky in this place, like it clung to everything and refused to move in one direction. He closed the journal and stuffed it inside his jacket. Whatever this house was, whatever it remembered, he needed to take something real with him. The floor creaked behind him, not like before, when the sounds were soft and uncertain. This time, it was deliberate. A single step, heavy, balanced. Elias turned slowly. The hallway he'd walked through was gone. In its place stretched a longer, darker corridor. The walls warped inward like softened wax. He couldn't see the end. Shadows layered along the edges, too thick to be natural. A draft ran past his legs, steady and cold, as if the house had just drawn a breath. "All right," he muttered under his breath. "That's new." He edged toward the corridor, wary of its shifting walls. The air inside felt different, damp, almost metallic. As he stepped through the threshold, the light from the study dimmed behind him, swallowed like it had never existed. With each step forward, the corridor seemed to move around him. Not visibly, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The house had no intention of letting him retrace his path. It was funneling him somewhere, and he knew better than to assume that was a good thing. Halfway down, he stopped. A whisper brushed his ear. Not words, not breath, just the faint suggestion of someone standing far too close. He didn't move. Another whisper. Behind him this time, he turned quickly. Nothing. Only the corridor stretching back. Impossibly long. The entry to the study now. Little more than a pinprick of light, and then gone. Swallowed completely. His pulse thudded in his ears. He continued forward. The corridor twisted right without warning. Elias caught himself against the wall, bracing as he rounded the bend. The wood shuddered beneath his palm, soft again, like something alive, shifting. The corridor opened abruptly into a wider room. He hesitated at the threshold. It was a child's room. A small bed pushed up against one wall, sheets neatly made. A dresser with faded paint. A stack of old picture books arranged with care. A mobile hung from the ceiling paper, stars and moons dangling from crooked wire. But all the illustrated faces in the books had been scratched out. Every child's grin, every parent's eyes, erased carefully, meticulously, over and over. Elias stepped in. Something about the room settled uneasily in him, as though he had walked into a memory he wasn't allowed to claim. He approached the bedside table. A single item lay atop it, a small wooden toy sheriff's badge. The carved edges were worn smooth by the touch of small fingers. He picked it up instinctively. His stomach tightened. On the back, carved in wavering, childish scratches, was a name. Elias. His throat closed. He didn't remember this. Not the badge. Not the room. Not the child who had carved his name into the toy, or the reason this room existed in the house at all. But his fingers remembered the shape. They curled around it naturally, like they had done so 100 times before. He forced himself to set it down. No, he whispered to himself. No, that's not real. That's, he caught himself. Not real. Real. Not real. The room dimmed suddenly, not flickered. Dimmed. As if someone had lowered the brightness on the world itself. He snapped his head up. A tall, dark outline stood at the far corner of the room. Not a person. Not fully. A silhouette, formed from layered darkness, edges subtly shifting as though it were made of overlapping versions of itself. A man shape, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, too quiet. Elias reached instinctively for his sidearm, but his hand froze midway. The shape did not move toward him. Instead, it turned its head, not toward Elias, toward the wall beside itself. He heard the faintest groan of shifting wood, a crack along the plaster, a ripple through the structure. The house was reacting to the thing's presence, or obeying it. Elias stepped back. The silhouette remained still, watching, waiting. Its head tilted slightly, following some rhythm or thought Elias couldn't detect. He felt a pressure in his skull, a thick, heavy push of memory trying to surface. Images flickered blue porch light, a woman's face, this very toy badge in a child's hand, but none of them gelled. The moment he grasped one, it dissolved. The silhouette took one slow step forward. Elias backed toward the doorway. The silhouette stopped. It didn't chase him. It didn't need to. He realized it had simply wanted him to see it, to remember it. The thought almost buckled him. The silhouette's presence was tied to memory. To his memory, the woman's voice echoed inside him. If you remember him, he becomes real. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, forcing his breath to even out. When he opened them again, the silhouette was gone, vanished cleanly. But the room seemed smaller, the walls closer, the shadows thicker. Something fundamental had shifted. He left the child's room quickly, clutching the journal beneath his jacket. The corridor, on the other side, had changed again, leading downward, now sloping into darkness. And for the first time, Elias knew exactly where it was taking him. Toward the thing he had forgotten, toward the memory he had buried, toward the center of the house. The downward corridor felt carved rather than built, its ceiling sloping low enough that Elias had to duck as he walked. Each step seemed to pull him deeper into a place the house had been waiting to show him, or trap him in. The distinction didn't matter anymore. He could feel something at his back, not following, not touching, but aware of him, measuring him. The air cooled as he descended. A thin layer of moisture clung to the walls, as if the house were sweating. He brushed a finger along the surface and watched the condensation bead across his skin. The ceiling dipped even lower before opening abruptly into a wider chamber. This room had no furniture, no windows, no door other than the hallway Elias emerged from. Its walls bowed inward slightly, following no clean architectural line, like the room had grown rather than been constructed. The floor slanted, subtly tilting toward the center, where a dark stain marred the boards. Not blood, not any liquid he recognized. It looked like old water damage, warped and darkened, but too precise in shape, an almost circular mark, as if something heavy had once stood or sat there for a long time. Elias moved to the edge of it. His boots made no sound on the floor. The journal inside his jacket weighed like lead. He pulled it out, flipping again to the last pages, where his own handwriting warned him to stop remembering, to erase the road, to forget the house, the woman, him. He knelt, touching the tip of a finger to the stain. Cold shot up his hand. Sharp, immediate. He jerked back, breath catching. The stain had no texture, no dampness. It was like touching ice carved into wood. Something creaked above him. He looked up slowly. The ceiling pulsed, a slow, contracting movement. As though the wood itself were tightening and relaxing in a steady rhythm, the boards bulged inward, then eased back. It wasn't a trick of light. The house was breathing. A memory surfaced. One he had no business having. You must keep the heart out of the house, Marshal. If he gets it back, he'll take the whole road with him. You promised. The words felt like someone else had spoken them into his skull years ago. Or maybe he had spoken them himself. The timeline felt tangled, frayed beyond recognition. Elias staggered backward, needing distance from the pulsing ceiling, the cold stain, the suffocating wrongness of the room. But the moment his heel crossed the circle's edge, the house reacted. The walls contracted inward, just a hair, enough to make his ribs seize with instinctive alarm. The slant of the floor sharpened. The ceiling dropped an inch. The entire structure seemed to lean toward him, not collapsing, but shifting. A form appeared in the corner. At first it was just a thickening of shadow. Then a silhouette resolved. Taller now, clearer than before. Not crisp-edged, like a person its borders wavered, ripple-like, as though its shape was constantly being redrawn. It stood too close to the wall, almost part of it, like it had stepped out of the house's skin. Elias forced himself still. The silhouette didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink or sway. It existed, and that was enough. His hand drifted toward his holster, but he didn't draw the weapon. He doubted it would matter. Bullets were made for flesh and blood. This thing looked like it had been sketched in charcoal and given permission to stand upright. A flicker of memory raced through him. A younger version of himself standing in another room, in another nightmare, staring at the same shape. Hearing a woman beg him not to speak the thing's name, not to give it weight, not to make it real. Not real, real, not real. The silhouette tilted its head, a motion too slow, too unnatural. Elias swallowed. What do you want? The question sounded hollow in the chamber, like the room had eaten half the words. The silhouette made no reply. Instead, the warped boards beneath it groaned, bowing outward around its feet. A ripple spread across the floor as if pressure pushed outward from its presence. He took one step back toward the corridor. The silhouette took one step forward. That movement slow, gliding, inevitable hit Elias harder than any threat could have. It told him the thing wasn't just an echo or hallucination. It interacted. It responded. It moved with intention. He backed toward the doorway. The silhouette followed, not quickly, not aggressively, but with the steady certainty of something that did not need to hurry. The circle in the floor grew colder behind him. The ceiling lowered another inch. The walls creaked inward, shallow breaths in a tight room. Stay away from me, he muttered, though the words felt useless. He reached the corridor. The silhouette stopped at the chamber's threshold. It stared at him, or seemed to. The shape was too blurred to hold real features, but Elias felt its focus like a hand pressed flat against his chest. And then the house shifted again. The corridor behind him elongated, twisting in the distance. Lights flickered where no lights had been before. The floor sloped further downward. A new doorway appeared halfway along the hall, a door that had not existed minutes ago, painted white, its handle gleaming. The silhouette lifted its head. Elias felt something compress inside his mind, like a memory being squeezed to the surface. Fragments flashed. His own voice calling out. The same corridor, but different. A younger woman grabbing his arm, saying, "Don't follow the door that wasn't there yesterday. It leads to him. It leads to forgetting." He clutched the journal tighter. The silhouette stepped back into the room, dissolving slightly into the wooden grain of the wall as if retreating, not defeated, but patient, waiting. Elias turned down the corridor and walked, because doing nothing felt like dying slow. The white door loomed on his left, bright and clean, impossibly fresh in a house drowning in decay. He didn't touch it. He passed it. He kept moving. The corridor sloped again, then widened into another landing. At the far end stood a staircase, one he hadn't seen before, leading down into deeper darkness. He stood at the top step. Somewhere below, something shifted. A footstep, a slow, deliberate sound. The silhouette hadn't followed him, but something else had. Elias stared down the staircase, every instinct urging him back. Up, out, anywhere but deeper. But the house had no intention of giving him a choice. Behind him, the corridor quietly folded into darkness, the walls narrowing as if the path he'd taken no longer existed. He gripped the railing and forced one foot onto the top step. The wood dipped beneath his weight, soft, pliant. He worried the board would collapse, but it held, bending just enough to feel like it was breathing. He descended. Each step carried him into colder air, until he felt like he was moving through the memory of winter rather than a basement. The walls, where visible, were bare beams coated in a thin sheen of moisture. The silence wasn't normal silence, it had a thickness to it, as if the house were muffling sounds to keep secrets from escaping. At the bottom of the stairs, he found himself in another chamber. This one was simpler, rectangular, low-ceilinged. A single table stood in the center, and on it sat a box. Wooden, polished, at odds with the neglect surrounding it, and seated beside the table, facing away from him, was the woman from the call. Her posture was wrong, too still, too exact, like she'd been placed, not seated herself. "Ma'am?" Elias said gently. She didn't move. He approached cautiously, boots whispering over the damp floor. "Ma'am, I'm Marshal Mercer. You spoke to me earlier. Are you hurt?" Still nothing. When he reached her side, he saw that her eyes were open. They stared straight ahead, vacant, frozen in a moment she never escaped. Her lips were parted, as though she'd been about to speak when something interrupted her. He swallowed hard. She was alive, technically, breathing. But consciousness had gone somewhere else, like she'd stepped out of herself and left the shell behind. A wave of dread tightened his throat. Whatever had happened to her wasn't physical. It wasn't medical. It was something the house had done. Something the thing in the walls had done. He crouched in front of her, searching for any sign of recognition. "Ma'am, can you hear me at all?" Her mouth twitched. Just a fraction. Just enough to make it clear she wasn't gone, only trapped. And then she whispered, barely audible, "You remembered too much." Her voice broke on the last word, thin from disuse. Elias leaned in. "Who did this to you? What happened?" She blinked once, slowly. "You let him out again." The basement tightened around him. Not literally, though, it felt like the walls inched inward, but in atmosphere. The air grew heavier, as though the house disliked the conversation. Elias touched her forearm gently. "Who is he?" She shivered at the question. "You know," she said. "You've always known. You forgot, because you had to." He shook his head. "No. I don't know. You're telling me things I don't remember." Her eyes snapped to his. That sudden movement alone chilled him more than the middle of winter air. "You don't remember," she whispered. "That's why he wakes up. You forget him, and he starves. You remember him, and he comes crawling back." A tremor ran through her hand, a barely perceptible shake. "And every time you walk down this road, Marshal, you find me. And every time you swear you'll fix it. But you can't fix what you made." He felt as if the floor had dropped out beneath him. "I made..." "What?" She looked at the table, at the box atop it. A small, perfect square of polished wood, carved with circular patterns, spirals, loops, intersecting rings. "Open it," she said. He approached the box slowly. The patterns felt wrong. Not malevolent, more like they repeated themselves in ways that defied geometry. He touched the lid, half expecting it to pulse beneath his fingers. It didn't. He lifted it. Inside lay a small, heart-shaped object made of dark stone. Perfectly smooth. Perfectly cold. A carved indentation ran across the surface, like the suggestion of a seam. He stared at it, uncertain. "What is this?" The woman's answer came thin and brittle. "His heart, the part you cut away." Elias nearly dropped the box. "That's not possible," he said, more to himself than to her. "I don't. How could I?" But even as he spoke, memory tugged at him, sharp and sudden. A night like this one, a road like this one, a child's voice crying in the walls, a man's silhouette rising from the floorboards like smoke. a younger version of himself lifting the stone heart, chanting meaningless words, sealing something into silence. He staggered. The woman continued, voice steadier now. You cut it out of the house because it fed on memories. You tore it from him to keep Red Hollow safe. But the heart tries to return. It always tries. And when it beats again, he walks. Elias shook his head. No, no, that can't be real. She gave him a sad, knowing look. Then why did you hide the road? His mouth opened, shut. The truth gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. All those years, she whispered. You patrolled the county line like you were guarding something. You kept the road off the maps. You pretended this part of the forest didn't exist. You erased him. And every time you let yourself forget, he weakened. Elias felt a bitter taste at the back of his tongue. But something changed, he murmured. Yes, the woman said. You remembered. The floor vibrated. A slow, rhythmic tremor, as if something enormous were shifting in the walls, or waking beneath the foundation. The woman's eyes widened. He knows you're holding it, she said. Elias jerked the box, shut reflexively. The vibration stopped. The silence, afterward, was worse. He backed away from the table. We need to get out of here. She shook her head slowly, despairingly. You can't leave with it, and you can't leave without it. What does that mean? It means, she whispered, the house won't let you go until you choose who gets to remember him. Before Elias could ask what she meant, the ceiling cracked. Not a small crack. A jagged line tore across the boards, dust drifting down like snowfall. Something pressed against the split. A shape, a head, a hand. The silhouette began to emerge. The woman screamed without sound, her mouth stretched wide in terror. Elias clutched the box, holding the heart tight to his chest, and staggered backward as the thing in the ceiling peeled itself into the room. It was no longer content to stay in the walls. It wanted to be remembered. Elias didn't remember making the decision to run. His body simply acted, driven by a survival impulse older than language. He bolted up the stairs, the box clutched so tightly against his chest that the carved edges cut into his palms. The heart inside felt impossibly heavy, like gravity had thickened around it. Behind him, the thing in the ceiling tore free not with rage, but with deliberation. Slow, patient, certain. Each movement punctuated the house's new rhythm. A steady thump in the walls, a pulse he had unknowingly stolen from it years ago. He reached the top of the staircase and nearly fell forward as the steps warped beneath him, bending like softened boards in the sun. The corridor beyond had twisted into another unfamiliar layout, this time narrower, darker. The doorways flattened as if pressed between unseen fingers. The house wanted him toward an exit, or wanted him to believe there was one. He ran anyway. His boots slid over a buckled floorboard. He caught himself against the wall, only to jerk away when he felt it shift beneath his palm, like muscle twitching under skin. He swore under his breath and pushed forward, breath ragged, every sense prickling with the knowledge that nothing behind him had stopped moving. He rounded a corner and found the front door ahead, just as he remembered it, framed by the entryway and the faint amber glow of the porch light. Except he didn't remember leaving it open. Or was it closed when he arrived? Memory was treacherous ground in this place. Still, the outside looked like salvation compared to the pulsing dark behind him. He ran for it. Halfway there, the hallway lengthened. Not dramatically, not enough to make him stumble, but unmistakably. The door slid further away, the walls tightening, the boards underfoot bending inward. Not real. Real, not real. He crushed the words down, refusing to let the phrase become a spell. The box in his arms trembled not visibly, but in feeling. As if something inside was listening, he reached the door at last, gripping the knob. It was warm. A shiver crawled up his arm. He pulled it open. Cold night air knifed across his face, clean and sharp, and for a moment he felt almost human again. Trees swayed in the clearing. His cruiser sat where he'd left it. The world looked normal, if a bit too still, too expectant. He stepped outside. The porch groaned under his weight, louder than before, as if protesting his departure. Behind him, The house exhaled, a long, low sound that reminded him eerily of disappointment. He didn't look back. He crossed the clearing, reaching the cruiser with shaking hands. The door opened easily. The familiar smell of stale coffee and dust hit him, and he nearly sobbed with relief. He slid into the seat and set the box on the passenger side. The radio on his belt crackled. A voice dispatch came through, clear as midday. Marshal Mercer, status check. You missed your 15. Everything all right out there? He leaned forward, thumb hovering over the transmit button. Tell them. Ask for help. Call every unit within 50 miles. Seal the road. Burn the house. But when he pressed the button, the radio screeched, distorting the words into static. No help would reach him. Not from there. He started the engine. The headlights illuminated the narrow lane that led back to the highway. It looked almost peaceful again, almost real. He shifted into drive. The cruiser rolled forward until something tugged sharply at the tires. He slammed the brake. The car lurched and shuddered. He stepped out, gun drawn. The gravel beneath the tires had sunk, softened, as if the road itself didn't want to let him leave. The ground pulsed faintly underfoot. The house stood behind him, silent and hunched, its windows dark, waiting. He looked at the box. The heart. He understood then. The road responded to it. The house responded to it. The thing inside now walked freely, because he was holding the one piece that kept it tethered. If he took it into town, he couldn't finish the thought. Slowly, he walked to the middle of the clearing. The night seemed to inhale. The trees leaned closer. The stars above dimmed. As if retreating from what he was about to do, he set the box on the ground, opened it. The stone heart lay still, cold, perfect. I should destroy you, he whispered. The heart pulsed once. A tiny movement, a single beat. Elias flinched. The house groaned in response, its frame flexing like ribs around a breath. The trees surrounding the clearing rustled sighed as if relieved. And he realized the truth. He hadn't cut the heart out to kill the thing. He'd cut it out to control it. He had been its warden, but he wasn't just its jailer. He was its anchor. The memory hit him like a blow. A younger Elias, a different house. A woman screaming from inside the walls. A child vanishing at the threshold. And Elias standing in the wreckage, holding the heart, whispering to himself, "Forget." Because forgetting was the only lock strong enough to hold the creature in its severed state. But earlier tonight, he remembered. He remembered just enough. He'd opened the door. Elias bent down, lifting the heart. It pulsed again. Once, twice, matching the beat of something enormous waking beneath the roots of the clearing. He staggered backward. "No," he said. No, I can't let you." A voice whispered behind him. "Not the woman. Not dispatch. Not anything human. You already have." Elias turned. The silhouette stood at the edge of the clearing, taller than before, more defined, fed by every memory he'd regained. Its limbs were long and out of proportion. Its head cocked at an angle of faint amusement. It moved like a figure on a film strip, frame skipping, yet always closer than it should be. He held the heart up as if it were a weapon. The silhouette lifted a hand, fingers tapering into darkness, and extended it toward him. "Give it back," it whispered. Its voice was a blend, man, woman, child, his own, all layered into one. Elias stumbled. He thought of Red Hollow, the people sleeping in their homes, the roads that had always felt familiar, the stretch of highway he drove every morning, the dispatcher's tired voice, the local kids waving at his cruiser, the town that believed he protected them. If he gave the heart back, the thing would be whole. If he kept it, the thing would grow stronger through memory. There was no winning, only choosing the shape of the loss. He made his decision. Elias ran. Back to the cruiser. Back to the road. Back toward the town he had sworn to protect. The silhouette did not chase him. It didn't need to. As the cruiser tore down the lane, the road behind him folded and twisted, reshaping its geography. Trees leaned in. The moon vanished behind clouds. and Old Briar Road stretched impossibly long ahead, like it had no intention of ending tonight. In the rear-view mirror, the silhouette watched from the clearing, growing taller, sharper, clearer, with each second, becoming more real. By the time Elias reached the highway, the heart in his lap pulsed steadily, matching the rhythm of his own racing heartbeat. He didn't know what morning would bring, only that he had failed to forget. And somewhere behind him, the road was already rewriting itself into the map of Red Hollow. Not real, real, not real. The words looped in his mind until they lost all meaning. The night deepened. The static in the radio grew louder. And as dawn's first light threatened the horizon, a voice whispered through the fading darkness. "And if you're hearing this, it already knows you. You don't believe me, do you?